Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Welcome to the Next Economy podcast. This is a podcast for the Next Economy. We're Lift Economy Impact Consulting firm, and we are interviewing leaders and change makers who are helping create a world, an economy that works for all life. And today I'm excited to have Lama Rod Owens with us. And Lama Rod, if you could please tell us a little bit about your work.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me on. Well, I'm Lama Rod. and I'm, a Lama, which, people don't really know what that often means. So that means a Buddhist teacher in the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism. And, in terms of like my work and my passion, it's really always been about community service, activism, community uplift. This is something that I've been involved with since I was pretty young. Mm. It's always been something that's been intuitive for me, even as, just as a very young person, even in like elementary school, I just had this thing about like wanting to help, right? And not just wanting to help, but like wanting to learn ways of helping people as well. And that's been a key thing for me, because that's been the thing that's invited me into like all kinds of different experiences and trainings and educations and this and that. So I've just wanted to acquire the skills to be a benefit in the world. But, I was really involved in a lot of community work through high school, through college. And then in my early 20s, I had the opportunity to relocate to Boston from Georgia, where I joined an activist community called Haley House, which was in the tradition of the Catholic worker movement. And the Catholic workers they were a movement of people during the Depression in New York, founded by Dorothy Day and Peter Moore. And they were like radical Catholics, right, who took Jesus seriously and and formed communities where people came together and just did what Jesus told people to do: feed people, clothe people, disrupt institutions and systems of violence. They were huge back then, huge anti-war protesters. They challenged, this kind of philosophical system around capitalism and these other systems as well. They didn't avoid the real conversations about what a liberated future looked like, because they were bringing it into reality each moment. And so the community that I joined in Boston was, I would consider, deeply influenced by the Catholic worker movement. It wasn't necessarily strictly a Catholic worker house, but we lived by, the same principles. The founder had been a mentee of Dorothy Day, who also became my mentor as well. But in any case, I moved there and was really doing activism really seriously, and also community support, work with people experiencing houselessness. But it was also there that not only I deepened my understanding of what it meant to really to practice abolition, right? But it was also where I met Buddhists who were living a really socially engaged life and who had a deeply socially engaged practice. And that was really one of the most influential experiences of my life, because I wasn't really that interested in Buddhism when I moved there. I had studied Buddhism, just academically in college, but I wasn't a practitioner. But I really saw how Buddhists were living and applying their practice to social change. And that really began to move me. And then I started practicing meditation out of necessity, because my life was falling apart. And I just pushed through my early meditation practice and kind of got into this place where I really understood that like this practice was what I had always been looking for my whole life. And then my meditation kind of expanded into Buddhist philosophy, and really early on realized that this path of becoming a teacher was my life. Like this is the path, right? And then that led me into deeper training in the tradition that I chose, which was Tibetan Buddhism. Part of that training was living in a monastery, which was in upstate New York, outside of New York City, actually, and entering into over 3 years of cloistered retreat, which was mostly silent, and completing that program and being authorized as a teacher. And of course, after getting that authorization, I began to teach and really returned back to my activist roots and really started doing this work around integrating social justice with spiritual practice and contemplative practice as well, right? Of course, that's given rise to all the work that I've been doing in terms of setting up communities, to the books that I write, and so forth.
Yeah, and they've influenced a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're a co-author of the Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation, which was so important to many people around the world, but especially Black and Brown communities in the United States. And that people who were taking a really deep dive into Buddhism were also talking about systemic racism, also talking about the places where the communities are challenged and calling things out.
Yeah.
And then you also have an incredible book on love and rage, the path of liberation through anger, which I just love because most people think of anger as the opposite of the path to liberation.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then with your newest book, The New Saints from Broken Hearts to Spiritual Warriors, one of the things I appreciate about it is because when I'm looking at my life, it's like, even though I've done a lot, like you, spiritual practice, spent time on long meditation retreat, not 2 years, but 3 months, 4 months here and there. What happens is that I go back into my life and then I'm doing the same things over and I'm judging myself. Sometimes the scripts are there and it takes a lot of effort to be able to turn and say, I'm feeling shame. What am I believing? What is the sensation going on? And what I felt like your book was a manual for creating a new standard of how one can see themselves in this world. Like another way and because you have all these scripts that you're getting from the media and you judge themselves. And if you don't have some sense of like, what am I ascending to or what am I trying to thrive to, then you'll just descend to the normal. So I really appreciate it. When you think about New Saints, what do you think, who do you think it's for, and what was your goals with that book?
When I began writing the New Saints, or rather when I was inspired to write the New Saints, I was really first and foremost writing it for young people, because the root of the New Saints really was during the 2020 quarantine, and it was actually right after Love and Rage was published. And I began to think about a new book, particularly after George Floyd was murdered. And I had found myself kind of doing a lot of media around the role of activism again, in the world, right? And then one day I was just like, there's got to be a book here about what it means to be good, right? So I just felt like a lot of people were like trying to be good, but that goodness wasn't changing anything. Like it felt very performative.
I think the women in my family have died from trying to be good.
Yeah, exactly. Like we die from that because, depending on where we come from, particularly Black folks, it's like our goodness is about accommodating the causes and conditions of white supremacy, because we think that that's how we're going to survive, right? Whiteness, right? And I was thinking about all of that, and I was just like, no, we have to choose something different, right? And for me to do that for the book, that meant I had to cut through a whole bunch of stuff, right? Like I had to tell the truth, right? In a way that I hadn't ever told the truth like in a book, right? I was like teaching really from a very, kind of truthful, straightforward place, but I never put that in the book before. But I was like, I'm going to write this book about what it means to be a saint, and it's not going to be what everyone thinks it's going to be, right? I'm going to define what a saint is, and I'm going to go full steam ahead with it, right? And the book is a journey for people, right? Let's just start where we're at and let's get into it. Let's really get into the depths of what it means to really understand what being good is and how to choose goodness and to reduce harm and violence and to be focused on the liberation of everyone. Like really everyone deserves to be free. Everyone needs to be free. Let's start there and build a practice around that dream or that aspiration.
I appreciate that, because one of the things is that our listeners are people who are activists. They're people who are B Corps entrepreneurs. Yeah. There are people who are trying to shift. They're regenerative agriculture. They come with a lot of passion. And I feel like sometimes they punish themselves with their concept of goodness. And we're not going to get to the next economy, I believe, because people shame themselves into becoming better people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I have a quote in the book as well in the first chapter, because that speaks directly to economy. And this is from Carrie Sealine. And I'm just going to read that quote because it really ties into everything that you just mentioned, right? So Carrie Sealine actually transitioned. She passed in 2020, I think in the middle of the year. And she was we had mutual friends, and she was a student out in California. She studied feminism, religious studies, magic, and so forth. But my friend one day during the summer of 2020 sent me this quote. I mean, you can find this in my book as well. And she says that the days are becoming indistinguishable from each other is a sign of eternity. The new world isn't that of waiting for the old order to reopen or the old economy to restart. It is to realize that the messianic age begins when we see that the essential labor is to love and feed each other and to revel in the feeling of endless resurrection. When we wake up and have nothing to do that we don't have to do unless we choose it and choose it in love. And again, that's from Carrie Sealine. And that was really what really focused my writing early on, because the new world, the new economy wasn't about just getting back to normality, right? It was about creating a world or culture that was founded in agency, that we will have the capacity to choose our labor, not be forced to do certain kinds of labor. And that labor has to be chosen and embodied in deep love for one another, right? And I was like, that's what this book is about. It's about helping us to dream into a future that's about allowing a new world to emerge rooted in love, right? But to get to that love, and particularly as an activist, as we were just talking about, to get there, we have to actually return back to an ethic of love. I think that's really hard work as well. Because
Yeah.
the love.
Well, I mean, as you know, the quote from Martin Luther King that love without justice is anemic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And justice without love is missing the word right now. It's not good.
Yeah.
um,
Right.
But how do you see that working? Because I mean, that's one of the things I do is I teach nonviolent communication. I teach collaboration and communication to people. And when I talk about compassion, especially when I talk to Black and Brown communities who have been in the front lines, I mean, I can get rolled eyes, and I wonder how you handle that. I mean, for me, it's been a liberating force, and but how do you keep that from that's sounding like a greeting card? Yeah.
Yeah, it does sound like a greeting card. Like, I mean, I used to be like that too, before coming into Buddhism and into practice. I was like, I'm tired of hearing about love. I'm tired of like love being a cliche. And I just didn't understand it. I didn't get it, right? I didn't believe in it, right? And so when I started my practice, I began to understand that love was really about telling the truth about myself. Like, I can't bring about the change, or I can't see or work for the change that I want to see in the world if I don't allow that change to happen for myself first. That means I had to tell the truth about my suffering, right? I had to tell the truth about, my own, I would say, darkness, right? I knew early on that, like, particularly early on in my Dharma practice, I knew that the change that I was going through in my practice was the same change that I finally had the capacity to bring about in the world around me, right?
Mm.
Because I'm going to use another cliche here, is that we are the world. you know, we hear this all the time. Oh, the world's messed up. The world is this and that. And then I was like, but I am the world, aren't I? Like, it's not just me and the world. I'm in the world. I'm of the world. So if the world is struggling, that's maybe a reflection of what's happening for me in my own experience, right? And when I began to take responsibility for my experience, particularly taking, kind of responsibility and beginning to tend to my own trauma, my own pain, and so forth, I really began to develop this insight into the suffering of people and places and institutions, the suffering of the land, because I finally saw it in myself, right? So there's a
It
like,
wasn't an intellectual
exactly.
idea.
Exactly. And that's where the experience of love really began to awaken. I was like, "Oh, this is love." When you're
And
able
you
just to
need
tell the truth. Mhm.
and you need the compassion to be able to tell the truth.
Exactly. Exactly.
Be-
Because the compassion isn't, so that's the other misunderstanding. Compassion is this kind of like weak, silly, Hallmark card thing. No, compassion is one of the strongest forces in the universe, right? Because it sees suffering and it actually helps us to develop this aspiration to end the suffering by any means, right? I am committed to the alleviation of suffering in
Mm,
the world, the alleviation of suffering in my experience, because no one deserves to suffer, right?
mhm.
Regardless of who the person is, right? Like, no one deserves to suffer. No one deserves to suffer because I finally understand I don't deserve to suffer. So, what I need for myself, I understand I need for others. Right.
Mhm. I'm just curious, do you feel like that's something that happened to you after years of practice, or felt
Mhm.
like it was as you it was started being obvious?
Yeah. I know there was huge shifts early in my
Mm,
practice, just kind of these breakthroughs. But it wasn't until I was training in retreats that I really got into the depths of what this was, right? And the thing I realized in practice and retreat, which changed everything. And I talk about this a little bit too in Love and Rage, some of these experiences of like really radical insight, was that, love and compassion wasn't initially about just making things go away. Loving, like, when you start loving yourself, it doesn't mean that like all the narratives about how you're not good enough disappears, right? But I realized that when you start the work of self-love or self-compassion, you start to awaken the capacity to simply hold space for all the narratives, right? And that it's not that they disappear, it's that like you're no longer reacting to them like you used to, right? And it's like, oh, there's that thought that I'm not good enough or I'm too fat or whatever it is. Like, there it is. And I don't have to get lost in it anymore because there's a lot more space around these thoughts and feelings now.
Yeah, I was experiencing that just last night.
Hmm.
Middle of the night, I woke
Yeah.
up and I was stressed about something on my to-do list, and so stressed about it that I was like, should I do it now? And then I was like, wait, felt into my body, and I was just like, I'm feeling a lot of self-hatred right now. And I could either daydream, but what I did, and sometimes I do because I'm not perfect, But what I was able to do that time is hold space and give
Yeah.
myself compassion
Yeah.
and not try to change it.
Yeah.
Like just notice what it's like. And it's so hard because I imagine that some people who are suffering, that sounds so empty,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's revolutionary.
Extremely, right? Because it's like freedom, finally. I have freedom to respond in a different way, not just overreact, not run away, not bypass, but to respond. So when something happens, I can go, okay, how should I best take care of this thought or this emotion in this moment? Right? Instead of just habitually reacting and creating maybe more frustration or anxiety. And I know that feels antithetical to, I would say, to activists, right? To say, oh, like it's about holding space and responding. But in that response, response offers us the capacity to choose really wise, compassionate responses. It's hard to do that when you're just reacting. Whatever comes up is what you're rolling with, you know? But when I move through the world now, I can feel the world, right? I can see the world differently because I have the space to do so. And then I can say, okay, this is what I want to do, right? And my response isn't necessarily based on fear, it's not based upon anything, but it's really about what's the best thing to do right now to alleviate or reduce the harm or violence that's happening or the suffering that's arising for myself or for whomever I'm with in the moment, right? And that's my primary ethic, is to reduce harm and violence against myself and against others. And so when I respond, it's about reduction of these experiences, not the escalation.
Right. It makes sense to me that you came to these realizations on retreat,
Mm-hmm.
because on retreat, you're not getting interrupted. You
Yep.
don't have to do the to-do list. At least
Yep.
you don't have to do as much of it. you, you have the silence. You're not getting all the constant barrage
Yep.
of influences, and there you get to really be with yourself, the good and the difficult.
And that's tough to, when you go, and like a lot of people have never done silent retreat for any length of time, but it's like going underwater in a way. It's just like you're like you're going, you're in silence, like everything becomes a little pressurized, and that pressurization forces you inside, and like we don't realize how much we run away from each other. I mean, from ourselves, right? We don't realize how distracted we are from our own brokenheartedness, our desires, and so forth. So you start that retreat, you're going to be right up against that. But that's also the most precious gift, because we live in a world, a culture where that's always distracting us. you
Yeah.
know, social media is always distracting us. TV, our interactions, everything working. It just feels like we're always doing, and going, going, going. But in retreat, all of that gets disrupted, and you're able to know yourself in a very different way. And that's been one of the most important, I would say the most important. Going to Haley House was like the one of the most important shifts in my life. But getting into retreat, sitting in retreat for years, has been the one thing that has changed like the rest of my life. And I really wish retreat time for everyone, if you're ready. you know, you have to be ready for, you have to want it. Because if you don't want this, it's just nothing but suffering.
Right.
You have to want to know yourself.
Yeah, and there's amazing gifts available when you are able to give yourself that time. And I'm also aware that I feel very lucky. Every time
Mhm.
I've done it, it's been a sacrifice. There's things that I had to give up, and that there
Yeah.
were sometimes it was like going into an unknown. I don't know what I'm going to do when I'm on the
Yeah.
other end.
Yeah.
And so, but that brings in like one of the things you talk about is that this is a lot of work. I mean,
Yeah.
these are practices that take time, and we have a society where time can be hard to find,
Mhm.
especially if you're struggling financially,
Yeah.
getting microaggressions,
Yeah.
all the time, what do you say to people in our community who are challenged with that? They're like, I don't have time. I don't want to even be with myself, because when I finally
Hmm.
am with myself, I just want to numb out because it's just so much pressure.
Yeah. No, I get that because that's also where I was coming from as well. Because it's like all this accumulated trauma, I'll just use the word trauma very generally here. Like all this accumulated trauma, and it takes a lot of courage to slow down and to look at that, right? Because you really don't know what you're getting into. Right? When you open that door back up and go back into all that trauma. I tell you, and just to be honest, if someone would have told me, I started my practice when I was like 23-ish. But if someone would have told me the amount of effort that I would be putting in the next 20 years, you know, I don't think I would have struggled a little bit in coming onto this path, but I'm glad I didn't know what I was up against, right? But it has been, once you say yes to like I say tending to the suffering, which once you say yes to tending to it, it will open up so much, right? But at the same time, I was getting the tools that I needed when I needed them, right?
You had teachers and a community.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I talk to people who are like kind of on the verge of making similar choices, I tell them, I'm like, listen, we have to figure out if we're ready to get free. I mean, it's just basically, are you ready for a real kind of spiritual, mental, emotional liberation? Right. And because when you make this choice, you will change. Right. And are you ready to like offer up everything that you don't need to make this happen for yourself? Or will you keep choosing the distractions? Will you keep choosing the deep exhaustion? Will you keep choosing the trauma and so forth? Right. We have to figure out if we're ready to get free or not, you know. And if you are ready to get free, I promise people, like, this is when you choose freedom through practice, you will start getting the resources you need. The resources are already present. Like, we're living in a world right now. Yes, there's a lot of struggle happening, but there's a lot of resources. There are a lot of programs out now. There are a lot of books. There are a lot of YouTube videos. There are a lot of teachers doing a lot of really powerful somatic healing work, contemplative healing work. Like, this is like available for us. We need to choose it. We need to choose to start doing the work now, and divesting from these systems, which we have relied on to define us, right? There's a really big disruption that has to happen at the beginning, of our practice. And then that disruption is kind of letting go of the ways in which we've allowed ourselves to be defined by systems and institutions, right? And we have to challenge the ways in which we have self-identified with our own suffering, right? When we say, well, this is just what it is, this is who I am. I am. You're not. What you are is an experience of complete awakened, consciousness, right? And what we're trying to do is remember that. But to remember, you have to go back through and metabolize like all the things that have clouded that our awakened consciousness, right? Which sounds really new age, but that's really it. you know? And the most sinister thing that I think that we experience is a disbelief in our inherent, innate liberation. Like, we're already
Abil-
free.
or and our ability to heal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I do resonate with that. I do have a lot of compassion though for people who they might have two jobs and two
Hmm.
kids, and and it's complex. And I mean, one of the things I'd like to see is that we as a society make it easier. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like I'm here because there were some scholarships. Like, let's
Oh,
just get
for
real.
real. For real, right. Right.
Yeah. I
Exactly.
mean, it's still a big sacrifice to not work for 2 months or 4 months. I mean, I'm totally in favor of those programs. They'll pay me
Yeah.
to sit because, definitely I'm working through some like ancestor stuff
Oh,
and all
yeah.
of that. But yeah, I mean, if we could
Mhm.
riff on the kind of world we want, I feel that that's important. Like
Yeah.
meditation in schools and different,
Yeah.
like institutionalizing healing, like real healing and giving people time.
Well, and also on top of that, collective care, community care. Like, I
Mm,
think that's a huge thing that's missing right now. It's like there are people who, yeah, as you just pointed out, like people who are like, I have kids, I have jobs, I have this and that. But who's supporting you though? Like, where's your care coming from? As someone who's doing so much for others. And that's what we have to return back to, like we have to rely on our community. If we have kids, helping, like really like having people recognize what we need, and if they have time and space, coming and helping us to care for our kids, to care for our home so we can have some free time, like to go and pursue healing, right? To take advantage of all these resources that are being offered, right? And I've seen that happening more and more with friends who are really trying to commit to healing, and family and other close friends coming forward and saying, you know what, I'm going to take care of something so that you can have the space to go and do something that's important for you, right? I tell people, have you asked for help from people around you? Who's resourced enough to offer a little bit of support so that can free up some time for you. But another thing too is like, what are we living with that we don't need? Like what can we offer up and get rid of in a way? Because for me, I come from a really, we can call it privilege, in terms of like I was in my 20s and said, I'm gonna dedicate everything to this path. I mean, I didn't have anything, first of all, to give. I didn't have a house, I didn't have kids, I didn't have a career. So when I like gave up everything and became a monk and lived in a monastery and did years of retreat, I wasn't really giving up anything. I mean, yeah, I gave up a lot of stuff and connection to community just for the time that I was training, but that wasn't really a hardship. I was actually excited about that kind of thing. And I have this really privileged life where like this is what I do. Like this
mm.
is my livelihood is healing, and teaching others to heal. But that came with a lot of sacrifice as well, and a reorientation towards what is conducive to liberation as well. As I was
And
telling, mhm,
oh, well, I want to hear what your thought is,
yeah,
and I wanted to talk about that liberation and the sacrifice
hmm,
because you talk about in saints like one of your the seven
hmm,
sorrows are
hmm,
you will have to say no to
yeah,
people. I mean,
hmm,
I might not be saying
or
exactly right.
disappoint people.
Yeah,
Hmm,
and I think about that
hmm,
because I felt guilty sometimes
yeah,
because I felt like there were so many people who were doing much more than I was, and
yeah,
here I was going on retreat for three
hmm,
months. And how do you, because you're also talking about engagement, like, and what I want from you, and I know you can't give it to me, is an
hmm.
equation so that I never have to go through personal pain trying to make the decision of where
Right,
do I put my
right,
energy? Is it time for self care? Is it
yeah,
time to take the bubble bath? Is this time to go on the
yeah.
march?
Oh my God! Every time someone mentions self care, they always talk about a bubble bath, like, which is a sign that like, oh, bubble baths are great. But what are we committed to? I mean, that's the question. Like, and I think about Harriet Tubman all the time because she's such a center of my work right now. And she always talked about freedom. And it was like, do you want to get free or not? Like that's the central question that I didn't ask myself if I wanted to get free. I was just doing it, you know? But like, I think we have to get to this place where we have to get real. Like, am I ready to get free from this suffering? Right. And if I'm ready to get free, what am I willing to offer to get free? What am I willing to divest from? Right. And, I was just thinking earlier in our conversation, I have this inverted path, right? Because I was able to go to college and I got out of college and was doing activism, through Haley House and so forth. And right after that, I entered into monastic life for years. And meanwhile, a lot of my friends were doing this really traditional path, right? Graduating from school, getting a career, getting a house, having kids, getting married at some point, getting divorced, like they went through this cycle and coming to some level of financial security. And I am just getting into that in my 40s, right? Like I'm just again stable enough to say, oh, maybe, how can I buy a house? And I'm thinking about parenting and I'm like, oh, long-term relationships, right? And that's a big sacrifice, I think, for young folks. It's important to think through. Are you ready to have this kind of countercultural kind of life at the beginning where you're not investing in the same things other people are investing in? Because that really made my family real uncomfortable. In my 20s and my 30s. They're like, you need to be settling down, not hopping around to retreats and like, having, the Dharma teacher life, the spiritual teacher life, right? You know,
Oh yeah. My family was like, "Aren't you fixed yet?"
I know. Ain't you ready to settle down? Don't you? My dad's like, ain't you ready to buy a house? I'm like, no, I have
Can
to.
you get the job with the retirement fund with the
Exactly.
pension? That's what my cousin sat me down. You should get a job with a pension.
hmm Listen, in my mid 30s, I was living in my dad's basement. And my dad was like so ashamed. He won't admit it though. But like he was just like, what are you gonna do? Like you don't have anything, you're living off of me, you're like in your mid 30s, what's going on? And I was like, I know the optics look really bad. you know, but I was doing all this Dharma full time. It just wasn't like paying me anything. But I was teaching, I was traveling a little bit to teach retreats and it just didn't look good. And I was just like, I literally kept telling myself, I just need to hold on and keep doing this because one of the things I believed and one of the things I was taught was that if you dedicate your life to Dharma, you will be taken care of. Right. Granted, I was being taken care of by my dad, but he was kind of resentful about it, But now at this point in my teaching and my life, people were like, oh, that's what you were trying to do. Like, this is what you've been building. I had to go through that to write the books that I've written to help people because I had to go through my own journey and I needed the time and the space. I couldn't be locked into a mortgage or like a serious career or have kids. I had to choose a path that kept me really moving along. So people, particularly my family, really, I think, really appreciate what I did, especially
Yeah.
like when they're like, "Oh, you're the one who's like mentally and emotionally mature in the family because of all these years of meditation." You know?
Yeah, that's true. And that's better than a retirement home is having a headspace that you
Yeah,
feel good in.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly it. But again, for me, the central question, are we ready to get free or not? Right? And that we have to take that seriously, because if you're not ready to get free, like you won't be able to really invest in what you need to invest in. And I'm talking about time and energy, not just money, but time and energy. Like you start refocusing your priorities, and I tell people all the time, I've missed a lot in my family. Like I've missed funerals and weddings and births, and in a way, yes, I deeply regret that. But I also know that like something had to be offered. And being with my family and having family time was what I had to offer up to get the resources that I needed to enter into this next half of my life.
Mhm.
That's what it took. And I think
Right.
it's scary for us to really think about what is going to take us to do real healing work for ourselves.
Well, I feel you and I are in a really lucky position because we've tasted it.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I feel that there's a lot of people who don't know what it's like. And I think part of the responsibility of having been blessed with time and that energy is how do you work towards creating a better situation so that other people have an easier time? For
Yeah.
example, not being the only Black
Hmm.
person in a meditation
Hmm.
hall. And
Hmm.
like even that is something that I offered.
That's pioneer
Oh,
work
God.
in a way. Like,
Yeah.
it's like we had to be the only Black folks in a meditation hall, like, in order to open the door. And we opened the door by becoming teachers and leaders in the community, right? And then, just to be honest, that really didn't impact me as much as it should have, because when I was the only person of color in retreats, meditation halls, like, I was never thinking about how I'm the only Black person or person of color. I was like so grateful to be getting these teachings, right? And I knew
Mm,
that, like, once I became a teacher, then just my presence and my visibility would change communities. Because people would say, "Oh, Rod did it, I can do it." Or, more people trust us because we look like them. Black people trust us in Dharma because, oh, it's more than just Tina Turner. you know? It's there are many other Black practitioners and teachers, and we all had to go through the same process, you know? So it's a lot easier. I didn't have a Black Lama when I was
mm.
training. Never met a Black Lama until I became a Lama. I was looking in the mirror. That's, honestly, that was it. I was the first Black Lama that I ever knew, right? That's how serious it was.
Right. And it's interesting you talk about that process of having mentors and community. And because that was one of the things that really touched me in your book on rage
Mhm.
was talking about your teacher
Yeah.
where you found out that they had abused
Mhm.
some students sexually.
Mhm.
And I mean, this is one of the places where you said that in Saints you got real. I felt like you were getting real there too,
Mhm.
because you
Mhm.
didn't mince words. You talked about denying it to
Yeah.
yourself. You talked
Yep.
about not being able to face the reality.
Yep.
And the reason I'm
Yep.
bringing this up is because
Mhm.
I feel that when you talk about community and how important it is, you need to talk about how people disappoint you and how do
Yes.
you handle that?
Yeah.
Because if you don't have a way of handling
Yeah.
that, because when you talked about,
Yeah.
I see that in my family, I see that with my friends, I
Mhm.
see that with everyone, is that you get these amazing gifts and then they
Mhm.
also hurt you. And
Yep.
how do you make sense of that?
Yeah. You can't forget that people are human, even if you think they're enlightened, right? And even for my teacher, I always talk about complexity. Like, we are complex beings. And when we forget people are complex, that's when we start setting ourselves up to be hurt and disappointed by people. So with my teacher, yes, I was deeply disappointed, deeply hurt, right? Especially at the beginning, and I talk about denial being one of the things that I went to because I was like, I'm just not going to think about it. I'm not going to deal with it, right? And I went to one of my elders, and she was just like, "Well, denial isn't part of our practice, first and foremost. So you're gonna have to make another choice." But she was like, "Listen, like, I know how overwhelming this seems, right? And what you need to do is just tell the truth, right? You need to articulate that this is overwhelming and you don't know what to think or how to act right now or how to respond, right? That is a choice that you can make. Denying it is not the choice, right?" And so I allowed myself to say, "You know what? I don't know what to do. I don't know how to deal with this situation." That gave me the space to get clear about how I felt about everything. And that got me into the complexity of understanding that, like, yeah, this person changed my life. Like, my root teacher, my primary teacher changed my life, right? And at the same time, he hurt others. And both are true, right?
Hmm.
And then the practice is holding both of those truths together which is such a intense experience because we're just not used to training like that. We're not used to training in contradictions, but you bring both of these truthful contradictions together and you're like, okay, I can say that I love this person and this person helped me, and I can also say that this person created harm, hurt others, people that I know and love as well. Both are true. So when I think about him, both of those things are present,
Mm.
right? I don't think the truth of his violence diminishes his impact in my life, either. But I'm able just to say, yeah, this person was really complex and did things that, that didn't happen to me, but it happened to others, right?
And that's really important because when you teach, if you didn't accept the gifts, you wouldn't be able to go forward and give
Yeah,
those gifts to others.
yeah,
On the other hand, if you just kept your blinders on, then you're not taking responsibility as a community member for all those people that were hurt. And I feel
yeah,
like that feeling like you either have to do
mhm,
one thing or the other, and this very narrow idea of ethics
yeah,
can hurt people.
exactly. Absolutely. Right. And I got a lot of pressure because everyone around me in my community they were taking those sides. They were hitting these extremes, right? Of course, one extreme was like our teacher is perfect, and the other extreme was like this person is a devil,
Hmm.
right? And I just kind of kind of stood right in the middle and said, I see both sides. I'm just going to hold both sides, right? Because that's the truth. It takes a lot of maturity to get there. And my teacher, I guess, in everything that was disclosed, really forced me to grow up. It really forced me to stop romanticizing what realization and enlightenment could look like for someone.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you become this perfect person. There's no such thing as perfection. Perfection is just this other thing, this white supremacist thing that we're still weaponizing against each other. So I got rid of perfection and said that, like, yeah, people, and this is what, create the foundation for New Saints. It was like, no, we're making choices second to second about goodness and about virtue and reducing harm, and we don't always make the best decision every second.
And I think that's so important for communities, like wherever you are, in order to
Mhm.
have true collaboration. And that's one of the reasons I think people should buy the book New Saints, that because you have a whole thing about forgiveness. And because if we aren't able to hold the complexity of each other, give room for the fact that we fail and we can fail miserably, I don't know how we're ever going to
Yeah,
really bring upon a new world,
yeah,
because we have to depend on each other and we have to be close with each other, and no one's going to be perfect at
yeah,
it. In fact, people are going to
mhm,
be horrible at it
yeah,
because we have, yeah,
yeah. I often talk about grace. Like, where's the grace at for ourselves and for others? Where's this, like, deep allowance for our humanness and for our
mm,
complexity? It's hard to let other people be complex when we can't hold space for our own complexity as well, because if we can't be with our own complexity, we become really rigid and judgmental against others. We start just saying, okay, why can't you be better? Why can't you do this and that? And because I've just really spent so much time with myself, I get it. I get the messiness. I get the struggle. Like, getting free and reducing harm and violence is such a messy projects, right? And I
mm.
tell people all the time, don't think you're gonna look good getting well. You know? Like, getting healed, that's like, this is not what's gonna happen. Like, this is about vulnerability and exposure and telling the truth. That's how we heal. And this is why we have to be surrounded by people who love us, who really, really care for us, who are wanting us to get free. And I've been so grateful to have people like that, in my life, friends and family, who's been like, I get what you're doing. Well, been more like, I love you and I trust you know what you're doing. I may not understand it.
Right.
Right. And what would be perfect? I mean, not perfect, but what would be really great too is just to be with people who not just like allow you to make the choices you need to choose, but they actually understand it because they've been there. And I think that's what a teacher is for us, someone who's gone through the process and know what you're really moving through and can really hold space for you and offer insights into what's happening. That's really incredibly important.
Yeah, we need more mentors, and we also need friends that we can trust with our vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I feel very lucky that I have people in that my life. But growing up, I felt like it was very hard to find because I grew up
Mhm.
in East Flatbush, Brooklyn,
Mhm.
mostly Black neighborhood, and being hard on each other felt like it was a cultural expression.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Reading, yeah. I have a friend from that time, or a friend since fourth grade, and it wasn't until our late 20s that we started
Mhm.
telling each other things about our lives
Yeah.
because the safety for that vulnerability. Yeah.
That's so much of my experience as well, like the harshness with us, like the reading each other, like the ways in which we force each other to have this hard shell, right?
Mm,
Which comes just from the ways in which like we were trying to survive. White supremacy is systemic racism, right? But we kept weaponizing it against each other. And I had to like kind of evolve out of that space as I was moving through my 20s and say, you know what, I need to get soft. Like
mm,
I need to get tender and vulnerable again because that's not I mean, I always intuitively had that, but I was always afraid of showing that because of queerness. Like I was like, oh, I had more access to that tenderness, but I was also very afraid. And so you go through training, you go through practice, but I started really using my books to train in tenderness, to really like open up my internal process, and to talk about these emotional states and to really reclaim the tenderness, the softness. That's been a really important thing. That's hopefully this is something that I'm modeling, not just for, practitioners, but for other Black men as well. And that's so much of my work is really dedicated to Black men who are trying to reconnect to this tenderness as a way to disrupt, right, patriarchy, the ways we've been conditioned into this system, right?
that's beautiful. I wish this for the Black men in my life, the Black boys and Black
Mhm,
babies,
mhm.
that we can have a place where full expression of humanity, because it's a gift to all of us when that can get expressed.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Deep bows for your work. I'm so incredibly grateful. I have so many more questions because there's
I know, yeah.
yeah.
We'll do a part
Uh,
2. Let's do a part 2.
yeah, let's do this part two. Thoroughly enjoyed this time. I feel inspired, less lonely. I hope.
Good.
Yeah. And so, where can people find out
Mhm,
more about you and
mhm.
yeah, and connect?
Yeah, absolutely. My website is a really good place, lamarod.com. We have all of my events there. I have a online kind of paid community on a platform called Podia that you pay like just, small monthly membership and you get access to a lot of like my own personal resources, teachings, and so forth. And I do a lot of posting in that community and work with people there. So that's a great way to interact with me. And yeah, books, as well can be found online, hopefully at your local bookstore, if they still exist in your city. And social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook primarily, and you can just search Lama Rod. On Instagram, it's Lama Rod Official as well. So all that's on my website as well. So go to my website, you'll get all the downloads for everything.
And the latest book is New Saints: From
Mhm.
Broken Hearts to Spiritual Warriors.
Yep. Yeah. It's a page turner. Go ahead and get it.
All right. Thank you again.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Before you go, we wanted to let you know that our spring cohort of the Next Economy MBA begins on March 26th. If you're an entrepreneur seeking to create a business that works for all life, a member of a team looking to transition your organization into one that is more regenerative and democratic, or someone who's considering a career or livelihood transition and embodiment with your values, we designed this course for you. Over this 9-month learning journey, you'll have the chance to learn practical skills around business and life design based on our work with over 250 social enterprises. In addition to live sessions, you can deepen your experience and practice with special sessions, affinity groups, and connections with over 500 alumni who have participated in the course. Interested in learning more? Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to view our course curriculum and sign up for a free intro with one of our facilitators. If you're ready to sign up, you can use the code PODCASTMBA to save 10% on tuition. We hope you'll join us.